Good morning. So good morning to you, good afternoon to you, and good evening to you from wherever you are joining us. This is a brunch time with Maiyegun, and it's also the continuation of the reading of this historical piece, the Atrocities story. Thank you so much for joining me, if you are. So we are continuing from where we stopped yesterday. And for the next 120 minutes, I shall be reading or sieving through this piece of historical work. And again, if you have anything else you are doing this morning, I do advise you to please go about it normally. And you can listen to the reading just like you listen to a podcast. Pretend that you're not watching, just listening. Thank you. We stopped at chapter 4 yesterday. Now we shall continue from chapter 5 this brunch time. So yesterday we sort of had a bit of introduction into the life of Aaron Smith, his place of birth, his primary education, and then up to the tertiary education, his experience in working with the Royal Air Force, RAF, as well as his posting to Africa in Egypt, where he worked, partially as well, and then his time in Oxford. So this time around, we are delving into his time in Africa, like fully as a colonial officer in Africa before it was posted to Nigeria. So this historical piece sort of gives us an insight into the culpability of British that betrayed the trust of their former colony, where people were not really allowed to choose their own leaders. So leaders were chosen for them through a rigged system, according to Aaron Smith. And he's not the first person to tell us that. It's just another British that decided to spill the beans. So thank you so much for joining me and then for listening. So chapter 5. I joined another union, the municipal and general workers, and became a Smithfield porter. The butter factory where I worked frightened me. We wore clogs because the floor was running with water, and after a few days, it was as if I had never been at Oxford. I would carry Shakespeare in my pocket, not just to read, but as a reminder of or key to that other world. At lunchtime, I would cross the road and hide in St. Bartholomew's Church. I had hoped to find myself, but it was more as if I was getting deeper into a bog. My job was to move crates of butter along a conveyor belt and bind the boxes with wire on a machine happily named the Guardian. A homosexual theater buff with rotten feet, who shuffled around stacking empty cartons, told me of a young bloke he had recently helped escape from the factory onto the stage. The young bloke's name was Maurice Mikuwit. And I have often wondered if Michael Caine, when he became famous, remembered the factory hand who took pride in helping others get on. There was much ribald laughter and teasing when I took my place on the conveyor belt. The girls on the butter packing machines were not accustomed in those days to have students in their midst. I say students because, having recently seen the Doctor series of films like Doctor in the House, they decided I was a medical student. When I protested that I was not, they said I was really a psychologist. One of those doctors who listen to your dreams. They had seen that film too. The girls would invite me to listen to the glorious, sexy dreams they had had, and ask me to say what they all meant. The machines, were very close to the conveyor belt. And when the girls created a log jam, the men had to take turns to move along the conveyor and squeeze past the girls. We were timid and reluctant to do this, especially as we knew from experience that the girls might force us against the conveyor for a bit of fun, and all the girls would howl with laughter. Before going to the packing machines, the solid packs of butter would be mixed with salt and water in massive churns. The salt was kept in the cellars, and because of the large numbers of rats down there, some cats were kept in the cellars. The sacks of salt we brought out of the cellar would be pungent with the stink of cat pee. The workers claimed that this is what gave the factory butter its appeal. The butter will pass through the packaging machines in a variety of cheap paper or fancy silver wrappings, heading for a cheap corner shop or a Knightsbridge store. We all knew it was the same butter, but when the men slipped some packs into their pockets, they preferred the posh wrapper, or even they felt it tasted better. My refusal to steal the butter myself was eventually to lead to a bad feeling. I was not only superior, but dangerous. I pretended to take the butter, but they were not deceived. I might tell on them. Perhaps I was a boss's man, a spy. It was time to move on. So when I applied for the post of labor officer with the Department of Labor in Nigeria, Carol had just given birth to our first child in Acne Hospital in London's East End. We named Helen Lindsay after Helen Margolis, who was now married to my college friend Neil Smelster, and Lindsay Miller, a fellow Oxford student we had met while attending a vacation course at the University of Tours. Helen was, of course, the most beautiful baby ever born, and Carol and I were blissfully happy. We made light of our housing and money problems because we considered ourselves to be so privileged and fortunate, as we could no longer live in our one-room bed sitter in Gore Road, Hackney. Carol's parents had generously offered to make room for us in their large Victorian house in Bethune Road, Stamford Hill. Obviously, this could only be a temporary expedient, and perhaps this was a factor in my applying to work in Nigeria. Two other considerations influenced our decision. Firstly, the job was on a temporary contract basis for a period of 2 years. Secondly, Nigeria was clearly close to independence. I would not have been interested in propping up a colonial regime. Preparing a colony for independence was a totally different matter. My first impression of the colonial office was that it was as quiet as an empty church, which was not inappropriate as it was situated in Church House, Westminster. Small pocket rooms opened up long, lifeless corridors. Apparently, I was to be interviewed by the labor advisor to the Secretary of State for the Colonies, Mr. Bartrop. In fact, a board of 4 or 5 officials awaited me, crowded around a little table in a small room. I had the impression that the board was a formality. The questioning was friendly, and the job was mine. Had I known how desperately keen they were to employ me, I could at least have negotiated the salary offered up to a level it would have been possible to exist on. There were, in fact, 10,000 senior staff vacancies in Nigeria at that time. Had I known what was awaiting me in Lagos, I would have been 10,000 plus 1. Mr. Bartrop advised me that I was going to have heavy responsibilities thrust on me in Nigeria. Labor officers were very thin on the ground. Accommodation would be available, and there would be no objection to my being accompanied by my wife and daughter. I had made it clear that I would not be interested in the post otherwise. What do you think of the job? Asked Mr. Bartrop. I replied in my usual jocular fashion that it sounded like a cross between a Boy Scout patrol leader and a factory's inspector. I immediately wished I had kept my mouth shut, but everyone smiled, and Bartrop replied that this was in fact quite an appropriate description. The interview over. The messenger was leading me down the corridor as I thought to the exit, when he paused and whispered, "Mr. Parry, the Deputy Labour Advisor, wishes to have a few words, sir." Mr. Edgar Parry looked like the trade union official he had once been. He had served very successfully as Commissioner of Labour in Freetown, Sierra Leone, before coming to the colonial office. He was warm and friendly. He wore a crumpled, cheap suit, and he had had a few drinks. "So, you've got a job, Harold. Come and sit down. Forget everything Bartrop told you. They know bugger all. That lot. I'll fill you in on the real pictures in Lagos." At this point, I should emphasize that although I was incredulous at what Parry was to divulge, I was to find he was extremely well informed, accurate, and truthful. This is the story, Harold. The Labour Department in Nigeria is a shambles. Peter Cook, the Deputy Commissioner, who's been passed over yet again, really runs everything and is a total disaster. A homo, a pervert. His speech is almost impossible to decipher, and his handwriting is totally illegible. He does have some skills in settling strikes, perhaps because the workers will sign anything to get away from him. Now, he will hate your guts, and as soon as you arrive, he will try to post you up shit creek. Parry shocked. But I've anticipated that, and I'll make it impossible for him to get you out of Lagos. I was never to find out how Parry managed this. It seemed not even the Governor General could post me out of Lagos, which was quite extraordinary. Into this organ stable goes bright, ambitious George Fogon, the new commissioner, the new broom. He's come from the Control Commission in Berlin, but really is just a jumped up labor exchange clerk. George is smart and thinks the Lagos job is a nice stepping stone into Bartrop's job here when Bartrop retires in a few years. But George will find George will find it takes more than his desire to please and his fancy handwriting to get in there. He knows bugger all about industrial relations. So we are sending him a researcher from the TUC, whom Cook will tie up in knots. You see, George's problem is that he can give orders, but nobody will take any notice because Cook is really in charge. "So where do I come in?" I asked. I felt quite shaken. "Exactly," said Perry. "What's in it for you? There are no prospects for you in Nigeria. You've been an intellectual, but we have very close working relationship with the universities here. And if you do what I tell you, a nice research job will be waiting for you when you come back. I need someone I can rely on to keep me informed on what George is up to." You see, we have to use informal channels if we are to keep in touch with what's happening on the ground. Now, George wants an intellectual to draft a Factories Act for Nigeria. They've had any number of people out in Lagos for years, and all they've produced is a pile of rubbish. Bartrop's very keen to see a Factories Act, and George wants an intellectual, someone who can think and write to produce one. It will be a big feather in his cap. Of course, Cook is determined it won't happen. Edgar Parry leaned back in his chair and roared with laughter. Peter Cook is an absolute bastard. We'll stop at nothing. But don't you worry, I'll look after you. Perry began to scribble on a notepad. "Here is my home address. All you have to do is to keep me informed on what's going on, and I'll see you right when you get back." "All right, Harold." I left the colonial office in a state of shock. My father-in-law's reaction was direct. Don't go. Tell them you have changed your mind. What else did he tell you about this new broom? He asked. That he was known to his friends in Germany as the go-later, and that the only thing wrong with him was that he thought the wrong side won the war. Maybe Parry was drunk, I suggested later to Carol. It can't be as bad as all that. Surely Bartrop would know, and he seemed a very decent chap, and so did others. Perhaps Paris just got it in for this forgone block. Look, 6 months later, the Smith family, with all their worldly goods, were on their way to Lagos on the mail boat MV Apapa. The intellectual luggage in my head was my honors degree course at Oxford in philosophy, politics, and economics. This modern great course, as it was known, was the recommended training for the administrators who filled the top jobs in the British civil service. I was exceptionally well qualified in that. I also had the qualification of the university diploma in public and social administration. All this training was to prove totally irrelevant to the actual practices I was to find in Lagos. A more realistic course of training would have centered on the works of Niccolo Machiavelli, films featuring Al Capone, and a masterwork entitled How to Lie, Cheat, and Steal Your Way to the Top of the British Civil Service, based on my experiences in Lagos. An extremely well-informed American academic, Henry L. Breton, in his devastating critique of British rule, Power and Stability in Nigeria, published in 1962, exposes the fraud, chicanery, and skullduggery of the British colonial rulers in such fine scholarly language that his message was easily ignored. One of his chapters is headed with the delicate understatement which characterizes his writing, in quote, not as taught as Oxford. You could say that again, Henry, and again, and again. On our voyage to Lagos, Carol and I had ample time to digest Edgar Parry's warning of what we would find awaiting us in Nigeria. We had decided that the only course was to act correctly and honestly. We would have no truck with underhand behavior, lies, and deceit, and unscrupulous plotting for personal advantage. For a start, we had no intention of sending secret reports back to the colonial office. Edgar Parry was obviously extremely well informed already, as we were to confirm. And if things were so bad, was he not responsible? We proposed to complete one tour in Lagos, do all we could to promote good works in Nigeria, and trust that after independence, Nigerians would behave honestly and responsibly to tackle the vast social, health, and economic problems which the British had largely ignored. The orderly arrangement on the mail boats gave way to chaos when we found ourselves in the custom shed at Apapa. Several gangs of laborers in rags were competing to carry our loads to a Department of Labor truck. A British official of the department introduced himself as Bob Curry and launched into an indignant speech to the effect that it was beneath his dignity to meet new boys. He was a senior labor officer, and he was only picking us up because he had been ordered to. That was probably true, but almost everything else he told us proved to be false. According to our informants, we were going to stay in the government rest house in the white enclave of Ikoyi, and would then go up country. He also gave us advice on recruiting servants, which was disastrous, and put the boots in the new commissioner of labor, whom he clearly did not like overmuch. For us, George Fogon's stock began to rise. The car stopped at a long series of whitewashed single-story offices connected by covered walkways. This was the Department of Labor, situated on the Ikoyi Road, leading from the many acres of Lagos slums to the beautiful gardens and houses of the white suburb called Ikoyi. Our ill-tempered guide escorted me into an office and introduced me to Judge Fogon, the commissioner. Fogon seemed cool, alert, and well-mannered, and showed concern that we had brought a young infant with us. We wouldn't have come without her, Mr. Fogon. The colonial office were insisting that they had your approval. I didn't know, Fogon said. The senior labor officer smirked. I told them the same thing. He shouldn't have brought his wife either. Fogon checked him with a disapproving look. That doesn't matter now, they are here. I'll drop them at the rest house, volunteered the senior labor officer. They are going to my home for a few days, said Fogon. They are booked at the rest house. Take them to my home, insisted Fogon icily. Our guide was furious and grumbled all the way into Ikoyi. The commissioner's house was very beautiful and set in an equally splendid garden with breathtaking displays of bougainvillea and frangipani. Bob Corey introduced us to the commissioner's wife with query. Mr. Fogon says these people are to stay with you with a question mark, as if inviting Mrs. Fogon to bar the door against us. I've heard nothing of this, said Mrs. Fogon. At first sight, she seemed an aloof and formidable lady with a strong Newcastle accent. I told them they should be at the rest house, said the senior labor officer triumphantly. I'll take them there if you like. I think it would be better if we went to the rest house, I suggested. There's obviously been a misunderstanding. Mr. George says you are to come here, said Mrs. Fogon. You'd better come in. We're shown into a very comfortable sitting room, but Carol, who was already very uneasy, was signaling that Helen needed to be changed. Of course, said Mrs. Fogon. Come upstairs and I'll show you the guest bedroom. When Mrs. Fogon returned, she asked, are you a labor officer, Mr. Smith? Yes. Are you the one from Oxford University? Yes. It's most unusual for a labor officer to stay at the commissioner's house, Mr. Smith. It's not the done thing. I will be very happy to stay at the rest house, I assured her. Oh no, Mr. Smith, she insisted. If it's what George wants. When Carol returned, Mrs. Fogon questioned her and seemed astonished to learn that Carol could be married, have a child, and be a graduate. It is true that Carol has always looked very young and at that time was used to being charged half fare on the buses. Unfortunately, Mrs. Fogon had told me that she had learned German with George while stationed in Berlin before she questioned Carol as to which course she had followed at Queen Mary College. Foreign languages, Mrs. Fogon. And which languages? French and German, answered Carol quietly. I could see this conversation was heading for disaster. I tried to change the subject, but it was too late. Oh well, if you have learned German at university, people like myself will have to be very careful what we say. She changed the subject. I think it's time we dressed for dinner, she announced. Poor Carol looked as if she thought we should make a run for the mailboats before it turned back for Liverpool. I tried frantically to smile and signal support and solidarity. When Helen had been given a feed and put to bed, we showered and prepared to change and go down. Carol was very upset and sat on the bed almost in tears. Why have we come? She pleaded. What could I say? I helped Carol unpack her best dress and put on my Oxford School's dark suit. We held hands, counted to 10, and went downstairs. Holding forth on the settee was a weary, small man with close cropped hair and very bad teeth. He was wearing a creased and weary-looking linen suit and tie. Almost the only time I was to see him wear a jacket.
Mrs. Fogon was addressing him as Peter and laughing with him. He evidently understood what he was saying, but his thick Scots accent baffled my senses. With time and knowing the subject of conversation, I will begin to follow his discourse a little. The introduction was so brief as to be non-existent, and he returned to his subject. This was strange too, for he actually allowed Mrs. Fogon to speak as in a normal conversation. To most people, Peter Cook would simply engage in a long monologue that was impossible to interrupt. When he had finished, he would simply turn and go. I suppose I was surprised that he was homosexual because in my almost total ignorance of the subject at that time, I had an idea that homosexuals were handsome or at least attractive. And Peter Cook quite obviously had neither of these attributes. He was quite repulsive. Mrs. Fogon had most certainly dressed for dinner. She was wearing a long sleeve, full-length black evening gown with jewelry, and her hair was pinned up. She was a very striking woman and was making a stab at being thoroughly poised and at ease. But her voice let her down because her tone was affected and her accent was an uneasy blend of low, gaudy, and southern acquired posh. Coming from the back streets of Ome and having been trained through the higher reaches of Oxford, I, of course, knew all about that. When Fogon arrived, he exploded on seeing Ness. Her name was Agnes, all dressed up. For goodness sake, Ness, that isn't necessary. The Smithies have only just got off the boat. He threw his jacket on a chair and removed his tie. Take your jacket off, Smith, and relax, he ordered. Your name's Harold, isn't it? His wife calls him Sean, said Mrs. Fogon. So you are Irish? Asked Fogon. Of Irish stock, my wife decided I needed a distinctive name after my dentist gave me a lot of fillings meant for another Smith. Fogon turned to Peter Cook and addressed him warmly as if he were a good friend. And how are you, Peter? Whatever Peter said was lost on me. Then abruptly, he was up and he had gone. Mrs. Fogon left the room to discuss the evening's meal with her cook. And Carol went upstairs to check on Helene. Have a drink, Smith. Relax and take off your tie, ordered Fogon. I sipped the sherry and loosened my tie. Fogon appeared to be in his element. He was relaxed and happy, and he was about to make me an offer. You are going to find a lot in the department you will hate. Don't worry, I am going to change it all. Some years later, he had changed nothing. Take notice of that pervert, Peter Cook. I'm going to get rid of him. When Fogon left Nigeria, Cook was still there. I need you, Smith, to work closely with me. Fogon continued. There is a lot of work I want you to do. A Factories Act, for a start. Nobody is to know you are doing it. You will get no credit for your work. It will be a secret between us, but you will be well rewarded. I promise you. When I get away from here, you will be looked after. I can't ask the people in the department to do anything. Everything is run down and the morale is terrible. Fogon went on to say that he had particularly asked for an intellectual to be sent out, someone who could handle papers. There it was again. It was news to me that I was an intellectual. Maybe someone had noted that I wrote poetry which I had published in student magazines, did writing songs for a cabaret at Oxford make me an intellectual. Sorry, I'll take that again. It's a question. It said, did writing songs for a cabaret at Oxford make me an intellectual? Or was it that I had convened the whole group for a time? Certainly, over the years, the Oxford poet Haldane But German, C.S. Lewis, and politicians like Gaskell had been drawn to the group. I'll draft you a factories act, Mr. Fogon, I said firmly. You really will, Smith? Asked Fogon. He was both anxious and elated. When do I start? I asked. It will take you a day or two to settle in. We've got to find you a house. Peter will see to that. Like hell he will, I thought. I was learning fast. I excused myself to see if Carol needed any help. Carol was pretending all was well and was smiling wanly. I repeated the deal Fogon had offered. And what did you say? Asked Carol. Very little. Nobody seems to expect me to say anything. Perhaps it's because I smile. I do want to draft a factories act, so I told him I'll do it. But nobody is to know, said Carol. That's right, I said. Do you trust him? Asked Carol. I don't know. Probably not, I replied. What choice have I got? We stayed at Fogon's a couple of days, and whilst appreciative of the hospitality we were being offered, made it clear we would be happy to get started in our own place. It seemed that Peter Cook had found us a very nice bungalow, and the following morning we moved in. The wooden bungalow had been empty for some time, as most expatriates preferred to live in the 3-story blocks of flats which lined some of the Ikoyi roads. Rats and lizards scuttled under the corrugated iron roof, but the biggest drawback was the lack of a proper cooker. The kitchen was very primitive and situated outside the bungalow. The stove had to be fired with wood, and all of that description. So I want to read something as a colonial officer. Chapter 6. The colonial officer. Henry L. Breton, in the prophetic work I have referred to earlier, distinguishes clearly between the formal aspect of institutions in Nigeria, that is to say, between how the Labor Department was supposed to work and the reality of what actually went on. Unfortunately, most of the early scholarly works on Nigeria did not choose to raise the curtain to see what was happening backstage. So that all too often, the analysis is curiously superficial and lacking in bite or significance. Of course, academics and others who were seeking to teach or work in Nigeria, not only before but after independence, would need to be very careful not to bite the hands of their colonial masters if they were not to be branded unreliable or unsound. Give me a sec. Right. As the facade of the constitutional system crumbled in the 1960s, many scholars with an investment of years of study in West Africa turned their attention elsewhere. Instead of decrying the paucity of recent scholarship, we should perhaps be thankful for the work of the scholars who were on hand in the early years of the new African nation. Even if they did sometimes suffer from political astigmatism and tend to cast the British government as a good old-fashioned nanny who always knew best and ran an honest, clean, tidy nursery, ignoring the evidence to the contrary. As predicted, Peter let it be known that I will be posted up country very shortly, but nothing came of it. The working day in government offices in Lagos commenced at 8 a.m. and finished at 2 in the afternoon. British staff wore short-sleeved, open-necked shirts and shorts. Khaki shorts predominated, but in the Labor Department, dark blue shorts were fashionable. Fogon instructed me to wear a linen suit and tie, as he did. I followed his advice, but soon jettisoned the jacket. A few days later, he ordered me to see that the other labor officers followed my example. My expatriate colleague ignored my suggestions as well they might. I was the most senior new arrival, and they were old coasters. It did seem an odd way to issue orders. The truth was that George was really a stickler for discipline and chains of command. The proper route for his orders to his staff was through Peter Cook. But Peter Cook for the most part simply ignored them. George simply did not know how to cope with this situation and was forced to try issuing orders direct to the staff. But they, in turn, only acted when Peter Cook told them to act. No one actually refused to obey orders. They just mislaid or lost the file or lied and said they had returned it. They would call the messenger in and shout at him. If that were not enough, they would dress down the long-suffering shift clerk. He, of course, as did all the African staff, knew exactly what game was being played. It was Mr. Cook they feared, not the commissioner. Mr. Cook, thank you, Festus. Mr. Cook was in charge of the administration, which included promotions, postings, sackings, and bicycle allowances. And he could and would make an African employee's life a misery whenever he chose. In all government headquarters, whether in Washington, London, or Lagos, the schedules of duties were divided into subjects. A department or section or desk will handle, as in Lagos, industrial relations, which meant strikes and trade unions, or employment, which covered labor exchanges and migrant labor. The problem was that an imposing title like legal and workmen's compensation might not generate any correspondence or call for anything to be done. This was not too important a consideration in the headquarters of the Labor Department, as it was Peter Cook's desire that as little as possible should be done. Anyway, colonial administration had been forced with some reluctance to set up labor departments under pressure from progressive colonial secretaries in London. Peter Cook's policy of doing nothing would have found favor with Governor General in the past, notwithstanding the administration's long-standing distaste for progressive measures. The blames did find that the Labor Department had uses. In wartime, recruitments could be handled by the department as could resettlement. But most important was the intelligence aspect. Intelligence is the lifeblood of any colonial regime. Trouble must be nipped in the bud and troublemakers controlled. The apparatus of conciliation and even the encouragement of trade unions made sure that most kinds of dissent or rebellion were channeled into the offices of the Labor Department, whence they were immediately notified to the administration's special branch officers. The Commissioner of Labor in each colony sat on the main intelligence committee with representatives of the police, military, and administration. The industrial relations section of the Labor Department in Lagos maintained daily contact with the special branch headquarters in the Cold War atmosphere of the 1950s, which the British had spread throughout their African possessions. The bogey of international communism was suspected of lurking behind every clerk or railway worker who sought to live on more than 2 or 3 shillings, 10 or 15 pence per day. Peter Cook's total inaction, however, and in particular his loathing of correspondence and paperwork, could be misleading. He kept a close eye on industrial disputes and could act decisively to damp them down when he chose. The effect of his policies on the staff of the Labor Department headquarters was to encourage total idleness. Peter did not tolerate laziness. He urged it on all expatriates. As he correctly pointed out, most items of correspondence, if ignored long enough, would not require answering. The subject, which at first appeared urgent, would be seen in their correct perspective when the page was yellowed and covered with dust in a departmental file some weeks or months later. The letter would then be seen to have been overtaken by events. Besides, answering letters promptly only encouraged the correspondents to write again. A good way to deal with an oppressive letter was to write BU 3 months, bring up in 3 months on the minutes page, and have the file returned to the dusty racks of the filing section, where there was a good chance it would never reappear. If by chance the file did reappear, the original letter might be buried under fresh correspondence, which dealt with a quite different subject. And anyway, the chap who had signed the original BU might be safely on leave and propping up the bar in a country pub in Devon by then. The employment schedule for section to which I was assigned was very quiet because it operated on the lines laid down by Peter Cook. It was Reg Lewis who was delegated to show me the ropes. No one quite knew how Reg came into the department, but a similar mystery shrouded in backgrounds of several labor officers. As some had a trade union background, it was generally assumed that those labor officers who were not ex-army and insisted on being called major or captain were ex-trade union officials. One or two had slipped in sideways from public works or the railways, like Peter Cook, and the ex-army types did not have much regard for them either. Reg went to the door and looked up the walkways. It was quite safe. The messenger outside each office were fast asleep. Sometimes a labor officer would awake from a nap himself and creep up on his sleeping messenger and roar in his ear, giving the poor man a fit. "Wake up, you lazy bastard," he would shout. Or they did in 1955. As independence approached in 1960, African staff began to be treated more politely, and wog, cone, black monkey, and other racist language went underground. Reg returned to his desk where he had insisted that I be seated. Looking around from time to time to make sure no one was listening, Reg gave me the key advice on how to survive at labor headquarters. "Remember," he said, "you've got to keep your head down in this place. You know what I mean? Peter Cook is a bit fly. Know what I mean? It's not just that he's one of them. You know what I mean? You mean he's homosexual?" I was prepared to defend Peter Cook's sexual preference, though I hardly knew what homosexuality was in the innocent 1950s, as I would have defended Oscar Wilde, an ex-Magdalene man whom I revered. It's the kids from the Alakoro Labor Exchange and the juveniles from the youth office, those trying to get government jobs, they sent up in 2s and 3s for interview by old Cookie. "I see," I said. "This sounded all right to me." "It's not what you think," said Reg in a whisper. "It takes them home and puts it to them." Puts it to them? You know, come on. Come and have a bit of fun and I'll be your friend and look after you. Oh, Jesus. "These kids are desperate for jobs," said Reg. "I suppose they are used to it. Brought up in the jungle, come to Lagos to go to school and live in a slum. Nobody's going to give them something for nothing. And everybody knows." Of course they do. Every other day, there are 2 or 3 sitting under Fagon's window in the shade waiting for Cookie. You've got to watch your step here, Smithy. You don't have to do anything. If you do, you'll only step on someone's toes. Just take it easy. Read the papers. Slope up for a coffee or beer. Back for 2 and home for lunch. And a little death. The little death was how it felt to take a nap in the steamy heat of a Lagos afternoon. Awakening for like dragging yourself from the grave. Now, you see, my understanding of that part is that Peter Cook, who happened to be gay, was actually like, shagging the boys who are like the Nigerians looking for a job in the Ministry of Labor. So Cook would take two or three of them. He would take them home to shag them, like as a gay. So some of them who are probably not gay themselves had to kind of give in. That's what that guy was explaining to Aaron Smith there. Like, he put it into them like that. I said, put it into them? Yeah, because they are desperate for a job. And they will, nobody's going to give you anything for nothing. So this was in the 50s, so before independence. I felt sick with the whole situation. What had I let myself in for? It was not that Peter Cook was a homosexual. That did not have been anyone's concern, but his own and his friends. I was going to be responsible for the running of the juvenile bureau and the proper and fair handing out of jobs. And Peter Cook would be, and I was to find he was indeed seducing and raping the boys in my charge. Edgar Parry in London knew this. Fogon, the commissioner, knew this. Apparently, everybody in Lagos knew. How could it be allowed? This was a question I tortured myself with. I still do. The trick, said Reg, is to get rid of files. If all else fails, you can lose the file or slip it into someone else's in-tray when he is absent or not on seat, as Nigerian clerks say. To mark a file PA for put away involved risk because it might disappear for too long, and if found, would have your name on it. Of course, one could refer files to another section. And if they send them to you, I asked, said Reg, then you write on the file, noted, and send it back. Of course, he continued, you can refer it up, but Cookie doesn't like that. He's likely to walk the file back and throw it on your desk. You could put up a draft reply to him or even send a typed letter for signature. He'd probably pass it on to Fogon then, and he'll be unhappy as well. If letters have got to be written, be very careful and sign them for the Commissioner of Labor. And who types the letters? Send them to the chief clerk. He's got 24 typists sitting at typewriters, but not a key is pressed. They have to sleep with their eyes open. It can be done, protested Reg. Just takes a bit of practice. If they close their eyes, the chief clerk throws things at them. And who keeps him awake? I asked. Hatred keeps him awake. He thinks he's intellectually superior to all of us morons. He's either planning a revolution or a book which will denounce us. You are kidding, Reg. I protested. I swear it's the truth. He said, have you met our famous author who is rolling in money? His books are translated into 10 foreign languages. No, where? You can't miss him. He's the messenger who is awake. You see him scribbling in kids' exercise books. His name is Amos Tutuola. The Amos Tutuola, I exclaimed. Oh, you've heard of him, said Reg. He wrote the palm wine drunkard. Drunkard, said Reg. No, drunkard. I suppose it's pidgin. It's amazing, said Reg. All that money, and the burger can't spell properly. On the other hand, I can't spell either, he added. But no one's paying me to write books. Now, you'll be in charge of the employment exchange, said Reg. But don't look closely. Know what I mean? Reg tapped the side of his nose with a finger. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. See all, hear all, say nothing. Keep your nose clean and don't go looking for trouble. Know what I mean? I nodded in bewilderment. The Lagos Exchange is totally corrupt, said Reg. But it doesn't matter, as any jobs the staff don't give to their relatives. Cookie gives to his boy friends. Cookie is the most feared man in the country, and he has friends in high places. Right at the top, they come to his parties, and his small boys dance with them. So I'm told, added Reg. Hastily, I've never actually been invited. I'm not, one of them. Now, a bit of black velvet, that's different, eh? Should I visit the labor exchange at Alakoro? I asked. Anytime, said Reg. It's like a Turkish bazaar. I could phone the manager first, I suggested. I wouldn't do that, said Reg. He's very busy, not at the exchange. He's running a laundry in Lagos, so he never goes near the exchange. He had to invest the money somewhere. Quite unnecessarily, he added. He's a close friend of Cookie. What else do we do? Oh, yes, said Reg. Migrant workers. 20,000 Nigerians working on the plantations in Spanish Fernando Pool. We license recruiting agents who wander around the eastern region where there are lots of Igbo kids without work. The Spanish beat them up, tie them to trees, and wallop them with wooden paddles. Can't we stop it? That's not our policy, said Reg. Cookie says they deserve all they get. Nobody made them go, so don't do anything. It will only bring Cookie down on you. He is friendly with the Spanish recruiting agency. It's very profitable. They send him cases of wine. But that's terrible. Yes, it is, said Reg. Tastes like bloody vinegar. We've also got workers in French territory around where Dr. Schweitzer has his hospital. He plays his organ to them and all that. The French don't beat them to death. The handing over was supposed to take some days, but after our showing the ropes charts, Reg disappeared. As Carol and I were determined to be honest, we were very soon put to the test. Once we had a flat to turn into a home and a cook, James, who became our friend, interpreter, protector, and guide, we soon took delivery of a car. A driver had to be found, and again, we made a good friend when we found Joel. This expense was essential until I could pass the driving test. One of the trade testers in the labor department offered to obtain a license by telephoning his chum, who was the chief tester. He was persuasive. Scratch my bag and I'll scratch yours, he insisted. It's not corrupt like the bloody Nigerians. It's just a favor. You probably want to do me a good turn one day. We would not have missed Joel for anything. All we had to do now was to do our sums, but we found we needed much more than I was earning. How did the other expatriates manage? Now we had the car. Carol could seek a job and quickly found employment as personal secretary to the general manager of British Petroleum, West Africa, and nearly doubled our income. Almost as soon as I was esconded behind the employment desk, Pogon sent me a pile of dusty files relating to the various efforts to draft a Factories Act for Africa's largest nation. My heart sank. As I turned the pages, I was not surprised it was all a mess. It was hard to believe anyone had seriously tried to put an act together, but that was unkind. They had tried, but lacked the confidence, the nerve, the will to make it happen. No lawyer will let any of this stuff near a statute book because my predecessors with these files did not understand the necessity for legal terminology and precedents. They had been trying to write in simple English, and whilst this was a noble endeavor, it was also a futile gesture, doomed to failure when teams of lawyers had to give approval. What should be done was to cut up the English Factories Act and the Colonial Act based on them. That was the first decision. This was to be a scissors and paste job. Secondly, the act had to be driven onto the statute book without delay. It had to be presented in the proper layouts, beautifully typed, with schedules showing the precedence for every phrase used. Consultations would be needed with trade unions, employers, as organizations, but this could be steamrollered through so long as Peter Cook did not get wind of it. The earliest letter on the files had been collecting dust for many years. It was a letter from the colonial office suggesting a Factories Act was needed in Nigeria. A high official in the secretariat had responded with "not in my time" over my dead body, and had parceled up the file and sent it to a small colonial possession in the Pacific by slow boat. The governor of Fiji, or wherever it was, had been trained in the same school as the sender, and he was not going to be stuck with a hot potato. He promptly returned this interesting document, having noted the content. I told my messenger I needed a large supply of foolscap, lined paper, paste, pins, scissors, and paper clips, and duly filled in a requisition on the stationery store. My messenger returned to say that the store was closed. They had none of these items. They were stock taken anyway, and Mr. Cook had given orders that Mr. Smith was to get nothing without Mr. Cook's approval. I got in my car and went down to the Kingsway stores and purchased everything I needed. On my return, I went to see the chief clerk and admired his neatly spaced ranks of typists who were struggling to stay awake in a baking hot, ill-ventilated room. Could I have a typist to take on a very big job for the commissioner? The chief clerk smiled. My typists are too busy, Mr. Smith. I returned his smile. I went back to the Kingsway stores and bought both typing and carbon paper. The Factories Act was drafted in my flat at night, typed by Carol as I was cutting, sticking, and making up extra bits. And it was finished in 6 weeks. A beautifully typed bill, ready for the lawyers, was presented to Fogon. He did not say thank you. To be fair, he appeared to be stunned into silence. The act went immediately onto the Nigerian statute book and was hailed by leading politicians as the finest piece of legislation ever to be placed there. The Attorney General wrote to say that the draft had been passed without amendment and was the best presented bill ever to go through its chambers. Fogon had tried to interest a former factories inspector in checking through my bill. The three of us sat down and began to turn the pages. Fogon was really happy and handled the pages of the bill as if it was treasured beyond reckoning. Our factories inspector was uneasy and kept glancing at his watch. After a few minutes, he stood up and said, "I must be off. We have only just started," protested Fogon. "I can't help that," announced our old coastal grandly. "Some other time, perhaps. I've got a cricket committee meeting. It's very important. I mustn't be late." The day my factory bill became the Nigerian Factories Act, Fogon telephoned to say he was taking our cricket team, old coastal, with him to the House of Representatives to see the bill become law. They will sit in the chamber behind the speaker's chair, a rare honor, because the bill was meeting with tremendous approval from all sides. "That's very nice," I said. Fogon paused. "Of course you could come too if you wanted, but I expect you are very busy." "That's right," I assured him. "I'm very busy. Thanks anyway." Whilst producing what might be a magnificent piece of health and safety legislation, which could possibly help cement the emergent Nigerian nation together and give it the trappings of a civilized country, I was also aware that I was producing what might be merely a piece of window dressing without real significance for Nigeria's eager millions. I was certainly producing a stepping stone to help Judge Fogon climb higher and higher up the civil service tree. But Judge's ambition lost me no sleep. I had no doubt that when he had finished with me, I would be cast aside and perhaps even destroyed. Our small flat in Fowler Road was perfect. It consisted of a sitting room with ceiling fan, spacious bedroom, a dressing room which became Ellen's room, a modern bathroom with a hot water, geyser, geyser, and a simple kitchen with an electric cooker and refrigerator. It was all we needed. Now that Carol was working, we employed a nanny to take care of Helen while we were at work. Comfort was an Igbo girl who told us she was 16 when she felt she found trust. So when she felt she could trust us, she later owned up to being only 14. So now we employed James as cook, the driver Joel, Comfort the nanny, and had 1/6 interest in the gardener who looked after the compound. The furniture provided by the Public Works Department was simple but adequate, and the flat had wooden parquet flooring. Mosquito nets were provided for our very large bed and Helen's cot. The king-size bed was an excellent idea because with the nets down, it became a secure insect-free zone. And when stocked up with books, games, toys, food, and drink, it was turned into a small, quiet, comfortable, and peaceful kingdom. The PWD chairs were also built for king-size colonial administrators. But once the dirty brown cushions were covered in brightly colored red rep material and cheerful curtains hung at the windows, we had a home which gave us great joy and a strong feeling of security. So jump forward a bit. So once we had equipped our flat with rugs and ornaments and a small radio and record player, we began to get to know our neighbors, particularly those with children. We also tried to invite Nigerians to come to the flat for a cup of tea or a meal. But in 1955, this was not as easy as at first we thought. What we had not thought through was that our intended guests would wish to return hospitality, and if they were living in very poor conditions, might feel embarrassed. Even the few Nigerians in European quarters at that time were not always easy to get to know outside the office. They might not turn up at all or be late and ill at ease. Having said that, one would then encounter Nigerians who were much more urbane and sophisticated than we were, who were totally at ease in any situation. The general level of intelligence was extremely high in so many Nigerians we met, and though often they took pains to disguise the facts, all too often one found Nigerians in relatively humble jobs who were head and shoulders in education and intelligence above the European masters whom they served. Although it was obvious to me that independence could not be long delayed, this was not accepted by all English administrators in 1955, and some still talked as if it would never happen. In spite of the dubious qualities of a number of its members, the Labour Department did seem to have been successful in attracting into its lower ranks extremely talented Nigerians from the south of the country. Igbos from the eastern region tended to predominate, and some generalization do seem tenable. The Igbos were highly intelligent, full of ambition and drive. They were restless, but hardworking and confident. The Yorubas from the western region were rather more reserved and difficult to get to know. What sometimes might have been thought to be sullenness in the younger ones was very likely just reserve and shyness. It came from no feelings of inferiority. On the contrary, I often felt the Yorubas patronized the poor British with their inferior culture. The Yoruba or Lagosians in a secure senior government position had the character and demeanor of a very wise judge or professor. These were people of the very highest character, often self-educated to the highest possible level, yet modest and polite, as it was no doubt politic to be in the old colonial Nigeria. Men of the character of H.O. Davis, the Lagos barrister whose acquaintance I had the honor to make, were extremely impressive by any standards. These men, and I think Awolowo must be the most obvious example, would have been exceptional leaders of men in many Western states. It was fashionable for some expatriates in those days to taunt the Nigerian elite with being too clever by half. This was the reaction of people who knew themselves to be inferior or inadequate, often dogged by injustice, poverty, and by lack of opportunity. Considerable numbers of Nigerians often aided by dedicated Christian missionaries, had gained an education and become leaders of considerable stature. And if one thought Nigerian men were often brilliant, one only had to meet some Nigerian women to be stunned by their high intelligence, perception, and wit. It will not surprise me if West Africans proved to be a higher intelligence than many people in Western Europe. It became my rule to recommend almost every Nigerian who came my way for rapid promotion. This fitted in well with the obvious need for Nigerians to be found to fill senior posts. But again, although this was acceptable by 1960, it was by no means tolerable to many Europeans only 5 years earlier. It was suggested once in my hearing that the reasons for the drastic shortage of mosquito men in Lagos, our office floor and on the side of the desk were sprayed with DDT daily, was that every mosquito man who ventured into Mr. Smith's office came out a labor officer. Would that this had been possible, but the joke had some truth in it. And to be fair to my superiors, I had little difficulty in pushing Nigerians up the ladder. My judgments in that area appeared to be generally accepted. Once the Factories Act was out of the way, I was able to survey the awful state that the Lagos Labour Exchange in particular was in, and to confirm that ghastly atrocities were taking place in Fernando Pool. At that time, I think I genuinely believed that Judge Fogon would want to improve matters. It made good sense to pretend that he was going to do so anyway and act as if everything was going to work on a new level. I insinuated my progressive reformist prejudices to my staff, giving Judge full marks for his zeal and courage. Although I was beginning to suspect from Judge's reaction that perhaps he lacked the nerve and resolution to see the job through. I was never to see again the cheerful self-confidence and show of character he displayed when we had first met. I suppose I also felt, having given him the Factories Act that he had wanted so much, it would not put him out to back me in cleaning up the employment schedule. In truth, George was timid, cautious, even I think frightened. Perhaps he was finding that Peter Cook had powerful allies, but I still believe Peter Cook's days were numbered. Fogon had assured me of that. In the meantime, George was humoring him, and I had to do the same. Those first few weeks in Lagos were exciting. The heat was intolerable, and we soon became accustomed to the backs of shirts and dresses running with sweat. The damp, sticky climate could easily produce prickly heat, a kind of sweat rash, but we could bath in the morning. As the weeks passed, Carol would become listless in the evenings and homesick. Carol hated to be inactive and was happiest during the day because she had an interesting and fulfilling job at British Petroleum. If the truth were known, Carol would have much preferred to do her own cooking and housework and felt restless when watching servants look after us. We detected the same unease in other expatriate wives and wondered that those without jobs to go to did not die of boredom. Apart from this occasional depression and a few bouts of 24-hour fever, which I had and which alarmed me, during those early days, we had a few health problems. We took our anti-malaria drugs each day and were so happy to be in our first real home together with Elaine that even the clouds blowing up around my work at the labor department did nothing to affect our cheerful optimism. If the Victoria Beach was getting more crowded with African families, we knew who was responsible. In our first tour, Victoria Beach was only used by expatriate families. The Syrian and Lebanese community would lean against their cars along a deserted piece of the beach. This place on the road was known as the Syrian Beach. Our nanny, Comfort, would accompany us to the Victoria Beach and sit on the sand in a white uniform while we splashed in the sea with Helen or sunbathed. So other nannies sat on the beach watching over children. It was Carol's idea to get Comfort a bathing costume. We had tried to get Comfort to paddle in the water, but she had refused. I think she felt it was not allowed. We are going to get you a costume, Comfort, announced Carol. You are a member of the family. If you don't go in the water, we won't go in the water. Comfort looked stunned. Will you take Comfort to Kingsway and buy her a costume, Sean? Said Carol the following day. The Nigerian shop girls were amazed when I asked to be shown the swimming costumes and then told Comfort to choose one. Comfort was terrified, but I assured her. She selected an emerald green costume with some white edgings at the top. When Carol returned from the office, she asked Comfort to put on her costume and wear a white coat on top. We set off for the beach, with both Ellen and Comfort very excited. When the moment came on the beach, Comfort was tense. Very slowly, she removed her coat. Her costume fitted her well, and she looked really beautiful. We gasped with pleasure and ran screaming down the beach and into the water. Comfort was so happy. Over the next few weeks, we noticed other Nigerian guests in costumes going into the water. Then, as if by magic, one weekend, the beach was crowded with African families, and the road to the beach would be crowded with Nigerians walking there. It was wonderful. Europeans began to complain and head for beaches only accessible by boat. Half the housing in Lagos was insanitary, even by the low public health standards. At least the people of Lagos could now go to the seaside and enjoy the fresh sea here. The semi-educated Nigerians working as a house servant would probably know very little about Nigeria, its history, geography, etc. And he probably did not want to know. Even well-educated Nigerians could give little help to the Britisher studying any aspect of Nigeria. The curious expatriate had to turn to the few libraries and find books written by British historians and researchers. Most educated Nigerians were product of missionary schools, where the curriculum was very similar to that of an English grammar school. Many Nigerians delighted in the subtleties and complexities of the English language and deployed a very large vocabulary. They often seemed more English than the English, as some English academics researching Nigerian history and politics seemed more Nigerian than the Nigerians. Working at my desk, I would dread the approach of Nigerian clerks wanting to have a chat. Invariably, they were seeking advice, and after paying me compliments on my wisdom and learning, would put to me some fine point of English grammar. I was most often much more ignorant about split infinitives and participles, ending sentences than they were. If I professed total ignorance, they would think I was teasing them or being modest. I was not. I was simply telling the truth. I tried to dodge by telling them that English was a living, not a static language. Its forms and vocabularies were always evolving. If a new phrase or word was useful and used, it was in. It might not stay in long, or it might soon become a permanent fixture. My clerks were not interested in this at all. They sought the correct usage, the right pronunciation. Having said that, it was interesting to see the clerks themselves, for all the purity of their English, coining new words and meanings. Did you train here? I might ask. No, I came by bus. The clerk would reply. Is Mr. Jones on seat? I would ask, using an expression common in Lagos. No, he has departed, would come the response. Don't you mean Mr. Jones has departed? No, sir. His car has gone. He has departed. We really stayed up late and made a point of retiring earlier when Peter Cook began to call him at a late hour and uninvited. He would be carrying a whiskey bottle and a glass and would sit by the door under the garden window, always in the same seat. We would try to engage him in conversation by asking him questions about Nigeria. There were a number of topics we would have been happy to talk about to do with Nigerian history, such as slavery and the different tribal customs. And for a few minutes, Peter might oblige us, but then he would launch into a long monologue, during which both Carol and I would begin to feel it was very difficult to stay awake. His voice would drone on, and it was tempting just to switch off, as he needed no assistance to keep going. Occasionally, he would talk with considerable feelings and sometimes bitterness about his own life, and he withheld very little. Then he would be talking about young know-alls who came out to Nigeria and tried to tell old hands like himself how to do their jobs. He had seen them all come and he had seen them all go. Very nasty things had happened to some of those people who had crossed him. He had warned them, but they would not listen. They're not saying it's stupid not to take advice from people who were experienced in the ways of Africans. So let's jump that a bit again. Something more, interesting. So yeah, let's go to this part. That the compound was packed with people of whom only a minority appeared to be job seekers. Traders were doing risk businesses. Sorry, traders were doing brisk business. Groups of friends were deep in discussion, and the exchange compound was more like a market or a bazaar than a government office. People were asleep or drunk, not only in the compound. Inside the offices, it was even worse. It was impossible to distinguish between the staff and the clients because the crowds were on both sides of the counter. Job seekers or staff were fast asleep, stretched out on the counters, behind the counters, and under the counters. Fears, haggling, and bargaining were taking place, and no one appeared either to be in charge or to consider anything was at all unusual. I was angry, bemused, and amused at what I saw. I had to take another new labor office to see the chaos because I was not sure I could believe my eyes. On my return to the central office from visiting the exchange, Peter Cook sent for me. My visit had not gone unnoticed. So, you've been to Alakoro. Enjoy your visit? I thought it was a shambles. Peter, it's not that bad, really. It just appears untidy because it's relaxed and informal. People were asleep on top of the counters. So I said, it's very hot down there. The staff probably overwork. I burst out laughing. You're not serious, Peter. Indeed, I am. And I must remind you that you have no operational control over the exchange. Your job is employment policy. The exchange comes under the labor officer, Lagos, and he reports to me. Actually, Peter, the commissioner asked me to visit the exchange. He has asked me to take a personal interest in his proper running. Peter laughed. Peter launched into a tirade of abuse. I backed out of his office and returned to my papers. After some considerations, I proposed to the commissioner that all applicants be removed from inside the exchange and brought back into the exchange by the entrances at the other side of the building. Each entrance would deal with a different category of applicants. For example, new applicants will be separated from those renewing their application. Peter Cook surprised me by seeming to accept that this might be a good idea. He suggested I take one of his chums to the exchange to explain my plan. We pushed our way through the crowd while I explained my scheme. The large gates would have to be closed. Okay, drove them all out and closed the gates. Hold on, I said. I wasn't planning to do it now. We could have trouble. Well, if you want them out, get them out, said my companion. He began to wave his hand at the crowd and push them back towards the gates. I thought this was crazy, but I had to help him. As the crowd was pushed back into the gate entrance, they began to shout and scream and refuse to move. I tried to smile and be persuasive, but a hard knot of shouting men were holding their ground. I turned to consult my colleague, but he was nowhere to be seen. I was alone, holding back a threatening mob who were beginning to wave their fists. I ordered a messenger who was trying to hide behind a pillar to close the gates, leaving those who would not move inside the compound. I helped the messenger close the gates against the crowd, who went quietly. But once the gates were closed, they tried to force them open once more. I turned to those still in the yard and invited them to come into the exchange, where I would see that they got immediate attention. They began to move into the exchange, and the yard behind me was cleared of people. Now it was over. I was frightened. I turned as massive roar came from the crowd outside the gates, but they were not outside. The messenger had opened the gate, and a solid mob of the unemployed were charging towards me. Things looked very bad. I could not have got into the offices if I had tried. I stood my ground, and suddenly I roared with laughter. They had beaten me. I had been set up. My laughter changed the mob into a happy crowd of Lagosians who had scored against the stupid British. The crowd that hit me were not enemies, but very ordinary people. Instead of being trampled underfoot, I was lifted high, and I was carried that way at speed until I hit the office wall with this crowd and joyful whooping people. I sought the hand of one of the leaders of the crowd and held his arm aloft as a referee does for the victor in the boxing ring. So the winner, I shouted to the cheers of the crowd. People slapped me on the back and roared with laughter. I laughed with them. Looking up, I saw my eastward colleague looking down from the safety of an upstairs balcony. "Where the hell were you?" I demanded angrily. "I went for a pee, old man." "Had a bit of bother, did you?" "I could have been killed down there," I said angrily. "Then don't go looking for trouble." He snapped and turned on his heel. Right? So further again. So I was almost sorry when I eventually had time to pass my driving test, because it meant parting with Joel, our driver, who we liked enormously. He did have an occasional weakness for the palm wine, which on occasion had forced me to plunge into the Lagos traffic and learn to drive the hard way, because Joel was flat out on the back seat. Each day, Joel would switch off his screen and be very sad. He would then beseech us to buy him a peaked cap. It was very important that he have a cap. It gave him status. All chauffeurs had a cap. Eventually, we succumbed, and our servants and everyone else's cheered when they saw Joel's cap. It was an important victory. Joel showed it off and made sure everybody noticed it. Then after a few days, he was sad again. "Master, if only I had a khaki jacket." We could not stand the pressure. In no time, Joel was kitted out in full khaki uniform and could have passed for an officer in the Nigerian army. He always asked us to correct his English, and we rehearsed a word or phrase until he had got it fixed in his memory. Joel was staying at his brother's house in Lagos at the time, and occasionally I would run him home. One day, he remarked that he was sleeping with his sister-in-law. "No, Joel," I corrected him. "You are staying with your sister-in-law." "No, master," he said. "I am sleeping with her." "Yes, Joel," I said. "Sleeping in the same house. If you say I am sleeping with someone, it means like man and wife." "Oh, I don't touch her," said Joel. "But I sleep with her in the same bed. My brother is away." "Doesn't he mind?" I asked. Isn't it a bit risky?" "Of course not, master," said Joel. "My brother has taken precautions." "Precautions, Joel?" "Yes. When he go, he put juju on back of door. When he come home, he will ask Juju if I have touched his wife. If Juju say yes, he will kill me. I do hope the Juju doesn't fall off the floor and give him the wrong message. Joel, I said, I'm going to have a word with that Juju, master, myself, or maybe you are going to have to find a new driver. With that, Joel threw himself around in a fit of laughter, and the car shot off the road and sent a crowd of Lagosians jumping for their lives. On another occasion, I discussed Juju with Joel, and he said it was a pity. African Juju was so weak, unlike British Juju. I was very intrigued by this. We don't have Juju, Joel, I insisted. Oh, master, said Joel, rolling his eyes up to heaven, as if seeking forgiveness for this idiot white man. Master, said Joel, white men have Juju that gets them pretty girls when they want, get drunk when they want, radio, car, anything they want. I don't follow you, Joel, I said. White man's Juju is money, master. It is the most powerful Juju in the world, said Joel. He was deadly serious for once. We were concerned about finding a job for Joel when I passed my driving test. We were surprised to find Peter Cook had offered him a job as a driver for the department. I knew he had taken a liking to Joel, and Joel was smart enough always to salute Peter and greet him. I thanked Peter for offering Joel the job. I didn't do it for you, Sean, said Peter grimly. I happen to like the man. So I won't have to go back to that heavenly job with the Lagos bus company, said Joel. Oh, those lovely ladies, master. I was all ears, of course. This lovely lady is the first on the bus, so I don't give her ticket. When we go back to garage, she say, okay, big boy, come. And she takes me back to her room and loves me till I can't stand up. Next day is the same. Every day is the same. Okay, big boy, come. On Friday, I go collect my pay, and the clerk gives her my packet. She gives me a few shillings and keeps the rest. See you next week, big boy, she says. Chapter 7. Anyway, we have just about half an hour now to the end of this, okay? Edmond. How are you, Baba? Jimo. Ejimo. How are you doing? Happy New Year. Oh. It's nice to hear from you. Here. My guy, Festus. How are you doing, Baba? Happy New Year to you too. Thank you so much for your super chat. And indeed, I will, I'll do that, okay? So I am coming to Houston, and I've been told that, you see where I'm coming to in Houston next month is very close to the, is it called the Texas Earth Center or something? I don't know. It's quite like an easy place as well. So yes, let's see. I'll surely probably see a lot of you in Texas next month, okay? So I'm going to put out some bit of information at some point, you know, like where we can have a meet and greet. Yeah, TOTU, TMC. What do you call that thing again? Texas Medical Center. So it's very close to the place. So I'm going to, I'm going to see TOTU. So we are likely going to put up, you know, we're going to put up an arrangement where we can have a meet and greet, okay? So I'm still trying to work it out. Should I come to Texas, like come to the US a week before what I intend to come and do? Like, what would I be doing if I'm in the US? Totu's birthday is 15th. Birthday party is on the 15th. My uncle's daughter's wedding is on the 22nd. It's like a week interval. So if and you know something, right? When I checked out on the tickets, my ticket for the entire family is somewhere around 2,600 pounds, right? So 2,600 pounds. So
whether I come in to spend a week or 2 weeks, it's almost the same price. Quite, somehow cheap. But I don't know if we are going to be allowed to keep the kids off school for 2 weeks. It's not like it is in England. To us in Scotland, yes, we can. We just have to notify the school. So it's somehow complicated. I've been offered to maybe come with Akinola. And then Agbeke will come with Yewande a week later. But she won't let me go alone. So if I am going a week before, then everybody will have to go a week before. If I'm going to stay in the US for 2 weeks, then all of us would have to stay in the US for 2 weeks. So I'm trying to work it out. Okay. So we are going to have a very lovely party, a meet and greet for the Temple of Truth, the Templars in Texas and the neighboring states next month. I will share the information. Okay. I'll share the information with us at the right time. So thank you so much, Bestie. Sure. I look forward to seeing a lot of us there, a lot of you. So we have a chapter 7. I don't think we'll get to chapter 8 in half an hour. So let's quickly get to it. The dark side of the colony. Dark side of the colony. I know, if Totu has his way. In fact, I should be in the US, I should be in Texas by the 1st of February. If he can have his way. He wants me to be there like right now. Come around, there's so much to do. Yeah. Totu Baba, no wahala. Don't worry, I'm trying to kind of like put the money together as well to see. It should be interesting. Something again is that now this year, I'm going to be coming to the US like regularly. Like I may come to the US like about 3-4 times before the end of 2025. I've always wanted to. It's just that I have never, had the chance or kind of like had the will to do that. But now I do, So you are going to have a lot of me. If I come to the US next month and I don't get to see some of you, you can be rest assured that if you don't see me, I'm going to do a US tour for the Yoruba Union as well. Sure you get. We are going to have a Yoruba Union tour of the US as well. But don't worry, time shall tell. So let me use the next half an hour wisely. In fact, it's almost like just 20 minutes. So chapter 7, the dark side of the colony. The Spanish colony of Fernando Poo had a well-documented history of cruelty to its labor force years before Nigerians from the eastern region began to work there under a treaty between the Spanish and British governments. The export of almost slave labor from Liberia had been investigated and banned by the International Labour Organization. The Spanish, in desperation, turned to the British government for assistance and found Her Majesty government very cooperative. The British Vice Consul in Santa Isabel was charged with looking after the 20,000 Nigerian contract workers in Spanish Guinea and was designated as a Vice Consul and Labor Officer. The colonial government in Lagos had given overall control to the administration in the Secretariat, but leading politicians had protested that the administration was too pro-Spanish. They demanded that the contract workers be looked after by the Department of Labor. The Labor Department followed the dictate of Peter Cook, an administration nevertheless. The line from the Foreign Office in London was to go easy on the Spanish. There was evidently a pro-Franco clique dictating policy in the Foreign Office, irrespective of the wishes of the electorate and the elected government. One of the vice consuls took a relaxed attitude to Spanish atrocities and enjoyed holidays in Spain, paid for
by the Spanish authorities in Fernando Po. My first discovery was that the treaty workers were dealt with under the Spanish Labor Code, and that neither the Vice Consul nor the Labor Department had an English translation. I decided to arrange for a translation to be made. In many respects, my investigation revealed a deplorable situation. No one had followed up except in a most perfunctory way the ill treatment of workers, which sometimes ended in death. The Spanish had no consideration for the lives of Africans. The British in Lagos were turning a blind eye. I began to sort out the files, and my attention began to focus on one file which listed many of the atrocities perpetrated by the Spanish plantation overseas against Nigerian workers. I began to press for action, and files began to pass up to Judge Fogan. However, Judge made no response to my endeavors. If pressed, it would be non-committal and say, leave it to me. Some files be upgraded to secrets and others disappeared. It was unclear whether this was because some of the files had been routed through Peter Cook. It was quite impossible to satisfy both Judge Fogan and Peter Cook, although I tried. I was always polite to Peter and tried to humor him. Unfortunately, the only thing he wanted were that I should do nothing and actually refuse to carry out Judge Fogan's orders. The extent to which I tried is shown by the relationship which we developed. We were on first name terms, something I was never allowed to be with George. Peter continued to drop in both at my office and at my home. An observer might have thought we were friends. Yet the Labor Department and soon wider government circles knew that a new raw labor officer was standing up to Peter Cook. Amongst the older hands, this caused some amusement. They thought I was living dangerously but admired my nerve. The up-and-coming Africans in the department had to live with Peter Cook and understood perfectly why they kept their distance from me. At the same time, I clearly had the confidence of the commissioners, as I was, to all intents and purposes, his right-hand man and friend. His only friend, it was often said. So there was some covert contact and support from these African colleagues. The clerical staff, because they read all the files, followed our battles with great interest. It was probably from the Africans in the department that I first heard mention of Francis Nwokedi. He was regarded as the most senior Igbo in the department, and he was reputed to have played a major role in dampening down the riots, which followed a shooting incident at Enugu Colliery some years earlier, when a large number of Nigerian miners had been killed by the police. When Francis Nwokedi bowed into my office one morning, I was astonished. His behavior was so unlike that of any other African in the department. He was not quiet, modest, or retiring. He did not keep his eye down. On the contrary, he looked you firmly in the eyes and smiled with such warmth that your first thought was that you had made a friend for life. Francis was good looking, seemed to be incredibly fit and strong, and moved like an athlete. Women said he moved like a panther. He exuded personality and charm and supreme self-confidence. He simply did not belong in the tacky old Labor Department. And with his restless energy, he always seemed to be coming or going. He bowed over men and had an even more devastating effect on women. My wife remarked that when Francis spoke to her, she was not only the only woman in the room, even if the room were full of women, but the most important. He would take a woman's arm and walk with her, and you would see the effect of that magnetic personality. He was seductive. He was seductive with everybody and could even charm Peter Cook. When I first met Francis, we were both in a relatively low position in the hierarchy, though I think he had, by then, joined the senior service. In a few years, he would be head of the ministry, but even in those early days, he dominated the department and often acted as if he were already in charge. Even more remarkably, everyone deferred to him, even Cook and Fogan. Sean, he announced to me after releasing my hand from a grip of steel, you must be dying of intellectual starvation in this hole. Why don't we drive down to Ibadan, to the university library, and get our hands on some books? I'll have to ask Fogon, I protested. I'll see to George, said Francis. I'll pick you up in the morning. And pick me up he did. I was expecting to go in my car, but Francis arrived in the department's new Chevrolet driven by a chauffeur. I was greeted like an old friend, and my clerk stood back, stunned, as Francis whisked me away from the god-awful labor department, as if on a magic carpet, to the architect's dream campus that was the new university college at Ibadan. Francis meant to impress. I was not stupid, and I guessed I was being given the treatment for a reason. He made it quite clear that he was 100% behind Fogon in his effort to clean up the department, and I had the impression he would be obliged if I would pass the message on. Although we spent a day together and I learned a great deal, there was much I did not know, and I suspected Francis would make sure I never did. He appeared extremely open and disarming in revealing details of his upbringing and education, and the fact that the tribal elders had given him a child wife when he was only a boy. In recent years, he had also married, as I was later to discover, a sophisticated, very well-educated, and beautiful lady from Sierra Leone. I do not think I said much on that trip to Ibadan. Francis just held me entranced with his stories. One nugget of information did stick in my memory. We had lapsed into silence as if following a rich meal when he announced quietly, I really want to go into politics. Politics fascinates me. I tried to follow up this theme, but Francis adroitly changed the subject. In truth, Francis was already in politics, and politicking was in his life's blood. The friendliness was calculated, and yet one really hoped that Francis was a friend and that a bond had been forged. He was my friend so far as I was concerned for the next 5 years, until I finally despaired of him. As he sometimes remarked, but Sean, you are so incredibly young. I knew he meant I was innocent and naive, not worldly, and looking to my career and advancement. On that trip, I expressed, I suppose, with all my youthful idealism, which made him roar with good-natured laughter, my interest in Nigeria and how thrilled I was to be at hand when this African giant will be independent and begin to figure on the world stage. If Francis knew what I meant, he certainly did not agree. This place, these people, Sean, it would explode. After that trip, I would be forever thinking that although Nigeria existed for me, it did not exist in the same way for Francis. He knew he was working for something called the Nigerian government. No one knew that better. And how to use and exploit a civil service machine. He simply did not believe in Nigeria. And as for loving it, he would have collapsed laughing. But at that time, I could not accept my suspicion as having any basis in fact. I was too impressed by his personality and wit and intelligence. Like many other recipients of his attention, I left Francis feeling he had answered all my questions sincerely. But when I tried to pin down what he had told me, I still knew very little. There was always something tragic or comic about that winding road from Lagos to Ibadan, which was for most Europeans the first introduction to the African bush or jungle. Trucks called mammy wagons, overloaded with produce and passengers, would hurtle along, often on the wrong side of the road. Vans were taken at the highest possible speed, and the driver seemed exhilarated as if riding a big dipper in an amusement park. The road was littered with the remains of cars and mammy wagons which had expired en route. As for the jungle, it just looked impenetrable and forbidding. Most of it was really cocoa farms, as the architect found when they began to survey the site of the university. They had been informed that they were building on virgin lands owned by nobody, but a posse of Nigerian lawyers representing Yoruba cocoa farmers soon disabused them of that quaint notion. As if to underline the fact that surprise and paradox play a major role in the Nigerian scene, we stopped the Chevrolet on a deserted piece of road and got out to stretch our legs and to pee into the bush on the edge of the road. No sooner had we opened our fly buttons and sent two streams of urine, action into the jungle when, as if from nowhere, a large European-style coach appeared, crowded with European nuns in white tropical habits. The nuns stared with considerable interest at this strange scene of the black man and the white man side by side peeing into the bush. The coach actually seemed to slow down as it passed, and I could see the Nigerian driver grinning delightedly. We returned to Lagos with a box of books destined for Enugu, where Francis intended to start a library in the department's regional office. I doubt approval was sought for this, and no other regional office was allowed a library. But this was how Francis did things. Perhaps he already knew that with the rare honor of an OBE for his role in the Enugu shootings and the commendations for his sterling work, he was the golden boy of all the African civil servants in the eyes of the British administration. But there was to be a twist in the tale of our trip to Ibadan. While still basking in the glory of Francis' attention, a sheet dropped on my desk. I was to sign a requisition for a department truck to go to Enugu from Lagos, a distance of some 500 miles, with a load of the books he had bought at Ibadan. Fearful that I was being set up by Peter Cook, I explained to the department's African administrative assistant that the books in question were some 10 or 12 volumes and certainly did not need to be conveyed in a large truck. The Nigerian administrator's face showed no expression at all while I explained this to him. "It's okay, Mr. Smith," he said. "No trouble, no palaver, just sign it." "What will Mr. Cook say?" I asked. "Mr. Cook is a close friend of Zeke. It's okay." "What has Zeke got to do with this?" I demanded. Dr. Azikiwe was the leading Igbo nationalist and Nigerian politician. He was a living legend for many millions of Africans. The black administrator shook his head and sighed. He obviously thought I was very backward. "Mr. Smith," he said patiently, "Dr. Zeke has been abroad. Now he has returned. His loads are here in Lagos. How are they going to get to Enugu without the department's truck taking them? No voucher, no truck, no loads. And Dr. Zeke is sitting in Enugu while his hairbrush and his toothbrush and his..." I said, okay, Mr. Fua, I said, "Hold it. I'm beginning to get the idea. I just thought we were moving books for Mr. Nwokedi to Enugu." "Well, that too, Mr. Smith," said Mr. Fua, with that happy grin, which so many Nigerians reserve for when they pull the first one on an expatriate. "By the way, Mr. Smith, did you enjoy your day in Ibadan?" "Very much," I said. "Don't forget to sign the voucher, Mr. Smith," said Mr. Fua. Mr. Nwokedi said you would not mind. I signed the voucher and stumbled back to my desk, feeling that somehow I had been taken, but I was not sure how. It was some weeks later that Francis flew into Lagos again and perched on my desk. One could have been mistaken for thinking he had flown in just to see me. "Has it occurred to you, Sean," he asked as we sipped a cup of tea, "that only the expatriate gets any refreshment?" Well, certainly Francis got refreshment, but I skipped in my mind whether Francis saw himself as a mere expatriate. "Don't you think there should be a departmental canteen for all African staff? That filing room is far too large. We could use half of it for a canteen. What do you think? What do you say?" That's a good idea, Francis, I said. But Francis was already half out of the door, leaving his half-empty cup on my blotter. I'll put your proposal to George, Sean, he said with a grin. I'm sure he'll approve it. Years later, when I saw Sergeant Bilko on TV, I would wonder why Francis Nwokedi kept coming into my mind. George wanted you, Sean, said his English secretary. Francis Nwokedi's busy spinning him like a top. Ah, Smith, said Fogon. This plan of yours for a canteen? What George has suggested, Sean, said Francis, is that we all contribute to setting up the canteen. Francis was standing behind Fogon and leaning over him like a teacher with a pupil. I'll make the first donation, said Fogon, and then you can take it round the senior staff. I noticed that Francis had already thoughtfully prepared a subscription list and was putting a pen in Fogon's hand. Here you are, Smith, said Fogon. George had promised to pay £1. I think a fiver would be more appropriate, George, don't you? Said Francis. And he scratched out the pound and put in £5 by George's signature. Then on the second line, he added £5 for himself. Fogon was totally nonplussed. Francis had him trussed up like a chicken. Take it to your friend, Peter, next door now, Sean, laughed Nwokedi. As I backed out of the commissioner's room, Peter will want to make a handsome contribution, I know, he said loudly, knowing Peter Cook would hear every word through the flimsy partition wall. I heard, said Peter Cook as I started to explain. He signed up for £5 too. In due course, the running of the canteen was added to my schedule of duties. But when some Nigerians would say how good it was that I had the interest of the African civil servant at heart and had struggled to open his magnificent welfare facility for them, I would say, well, what really happened was, and then give up. And anyway, surely no one believed that Peter Cook would have let me get away with anything as sensible and useful as that. The duty. I think my time is up. My time is up, but let's see if I can do this in 10 minutes. So going forward, it said the duty officer, hang on, it said, this is the part, okay. It said, the duty officer wondered which creek it would be sent up. One very hot morning at the office, I was walking through stacks of files at my desk. The overhead fan was screeching. Sweat was running down my back and I was trying to stay awake. For after several hours of reading dusty files, the urge to give way, to sleep would become irresistible. To rub one's eyes and rest them for a few moments was dangerous because one would suddenly come to with a jolt and find one had fallen asleep. I looked up from my files to see Peter Cook leaning over my desk. Peter was in a genial mode, for he was smiling and revealing his very bad teeth. When Peter was happy, he wore his smile all the time. Not just when he was with somebody. He would be smiling, sitting quietly at his desk, or walking down the concrete walkways to my office. He had decided to bring his smile and whatever idea had prompted the good mood to my attention. Peter was wearing his linen slack, short-sleeved shirt and Scottish tartan tie. It was not possible to see his eyes because he was wearing black sunglasses. I've brought you something from George, said Peter. He was carrying a file. I tried to read the file to read the title on the file, but Peter turned the front of the file to his chest. What file is it? Peter, I asked. Never mind that, Sean, said Peter. I just wanted to tear it up and lose it. Please sit down, Peter, I said. I stood up when I noticed his presence. No, you sit down, Sean, he ordered. I'm at right standing. I need to exercise my legs. I felt uncomfortable sitting back in my chair with Peter looking down on me through his dark glasses. And that was probably what Peter intended. It's just a bit of George's rubbish, Sean, said Peter. When is he going to learn that this is Africa and not some labor exchange in Pina? I waited while Peter's voice droned on. I had no choice. Take Fernando Poo, said Peter. Nobody asks those lazy bastards to go there. They think it's a holiday camp, and the Spanish have to apply a little discipline to get them to work properly. Peter, I protested. They beat them. Of course they beat them, Sean. Naturally, when you read those petitions on the files, you find it upsetting. But that's because you are new here. This is Africa. And if you start shouting and protesting at every bit of injustice, you might as well go and shoot yourself for all the good it will do. Peter could continue in this vein for half an hour without pausing for breath. I would make an effort to resist the exercise in brainwashing, for that is what it was. One would pray that it would stop or go away, and I could see why he so often got his way. People would agree to his terms, anything, to get him to stop talking. Peter's ideas were inhuman, intolerable, and unforgivable. I did not want to hit him. One had to control violence in oneself, or simply to push him out of the office like the sack of rubbish he was. Peter Cook was bent, twisted, and corrupt. And the pity I felt for this human wreckage of what must once have been a live, joyous human creature was tempered by the knowledge of the vile abuses he was perpetrating on the African people who were paying his salary. I suddenly jumped to attention. Peter had thrown the file on the blotter in front of me. It was the file on which I had asked the commissioner's approval to pay for a translation of the Spanish labor code. In your ignorance, Sean, said Peter, you asked for Fogon's approval to translate the Spanish labor code. Now, why do you want to interfere with the Spanish way of doing things? They don't interfere with us, do they? It happens to be our duty to protect 20,000 Nigerian plantation workers, Peter. I protested. Their safety, health, and welfare. And I'm telling you, Sean, to forget it, said Peter. That's another. Tear up the file, burn it, lose it, wipe your ass on it. I opened the file. On the minute page was Fogon's approval of my request to obtain a translation of the Spanish labor code. You are not giving me another, Peter, I said quietly. But that's just what I am doing, Sean, said Peter coldly. He was no longer smiling. Can you not hear what I am saying? I am ordering you to lose it. Lose that file. You are not ordering me, Peter, I repeated. With respect, you are countermanding the orders of the Commissioner of Labor. Now, that's where you are wrong, Sean, said Peter. Fogon isn't going to see the file again because you are going to lose it. No, Peter, I said, I'm not going to lose my any files. If you want to countermand Fogon's written orders, then you must put your instructions in writing on the file. Peter's face became contorted with rage. He became flushed, and he began to spit saliva with his stabbing commands. You will do what I tell you, Sean, or pay the price. No one crosses me and gets away with it. Just as suddenly, he forced a smile and tried to cajole me. Don't you see, Sean? I'm your friend. There you are with your lovely wife and beautiful daughter just starting out on your career. An Oxford degree too. You've got the whole world ahead of you. I can open doors for you, Sean. Peter, I said, let's put aside the Spanish labor code. I could be Lady Chatterley's lover for all I care. If Fogon orders it, I will get it. If you order it, I will get it. But if you countermand Fogon's orders, then I want that in writing on the file. I will do anything you ask, Peter, if it is a proper order and legal. There followed another hour of bluster, threats, promises, pleading, bribes, and long passages I could not decipher and had little desire to do so. Around Peter's mouth, a white deposit began to form. So, be a good fellow, Sean. Tear up the file. I can make life very good for you here in Lagos. No, Peter, I said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. So Peter stormed out of my office, and that was the end of it. However, Said one day I surprised Peter. I agreed to his demand. He was delighted. Grinning broadly, he left my office, promising me a host of good things. Would I now get paper clips or my typing done without a struggle? And would Peter stop plotting against me and trying to make my life as uncomfortable as possible? It would be a nonsense to list the petty tricks he would play. If Cook had a hand in any kind of function, my name would be accidentally omitted. If Fogon asked him to pass on a message, I would not get it. I hardly noticed most of this and simply got on with my work. I reached for the file Cook had thrown on my desk and returned it to him with a request. Will you please confirm your verbal instruction of today when you ordered me to ignore the orders of the Commissioner of Labor of yesterday's date and to lose the file? The file disappeared and was not seen again, but it had served its purpose, and Peter's visit to my office ceased, but the war hotted up. I gathered from various sources that for Peter Cook, I was public enemy number one. If we passed, he would not return my greetings, but just as suddenly one day his mood had changed and he reappeared to say how silly it was that we should quarrel when all he wanted was to be friends. As his peace offering, he had brought a copy of the department's own labor code in mint condition. Copies of the code were hard to come by, and those to be had were often unrevised or badly worn. This was a freshly printed version and something of a rarity. I thanked Peter profusely and was delighted at his change of heart, but I was also a realist and very wary. Hating myself for my base suspicion, I began to check out the gift copy against a tattered and torn copy I had in my desk drawer. In a number of vital sections, the regulation in the gift code had been altered. Anyone using the gift code as a guide to the law would have become a laughing stock. Yet here it was, all in print. Only someone in government printing office, taking a great deal of trouble, could have produced this forgery. But that is what it was. And did not Peter have a close friend in government printing office? So, brethren, that is the second reading. You know, this book was donated to us by my very good friend, the same Festus. God bless you, Baba. So we have it as a donated to Maiyegun's Diary, Political for Mental Reawakening of our people with love. Worship for during family. We appreciate you, Baba, and we shall continue tomorrow. I will make it a day, for us as well to continue tomorrow. After this one, we are going to go straight to go and read. You see this one, The Blood by Emma Okocha. This one is called Blood on the Niger. So we are going to come for this one, right? Next. That's going to be after when we finish the Atrocities story. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I'm going to see you later this evening, as usual, okay? One momento. Yeah. So I'm going to see you later this evening on Maiyegun's Diary Political, the proper. All right. And thanks for coming to the reading session. So if you have been here all this while, remember, you can still help us share this broadcast. Share it to those who might want to kind of listen. And then I will see you later. Good afternoon.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ làmọ̀ tó dòdòdò.
Maiyegun Diary, Maiyegun number one.
Maiyegun ti dé o, ọ̀rẹ́ ará ìlú.
Maiyegun
àṣírí ọ̀jẹ̀lú kì í bò níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
bó bá ṣe eré àní Maiyegun máa wí.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
ó sì tún ṣe eré wàá gbọ́ níbẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Maiyegun diary politico.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
Godfatherism kò sí lọ́rọ̀ Maiyegun.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
ẹ farabalẹ̀ sẹ́ o kẹgọ́rọ̀ lẹ́nu o.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
àní Maiyegun làwa mọ̀ o làwa mọ̀ tó dódòdó.
Maiyegun diary Nayibi #1.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Maiyegun ti dé. ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
lórí Facebook.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
lórí YouTube.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
bọ́ bàbá gbé wúrẹ́.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
ijó ìgbádìyẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
pẹ̀sìdó bá rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
kí gómìnà kówó jẹ.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
ọlọ́pàá tí ń darí bá.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
aṣòfin tí ń rúfin o.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
òpùrọ́ olóṣèlú.
Maiyegun máa wí.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
àní ẹ̀sùn ràkì.
Maiyegun ti dé.
Maiyegun ti dé. gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé. gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dèrò ní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé. Gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ o Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò fẹ́ bẹ́ẹ̀. wọ́n fowó bẹ́ẹ̀ Maiyegun ó sọ pé wọ́n ò fẹ́ bẹ́ẹ̀. oníkan ṣáàtì ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe fáwọn ará ìlú tó gbé wọn débẹ̀ o.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
kì máa yí ṣe eré ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣe ẹ̀fẹ̀. kì máa yí ṣe eré ọ̀rọ̀ yìí kì í ṣe ẹ̀fẹ̀. ẹni bá ti lè lẹ́bọ̀ lẹ́rù o ọmọ bá dèrò kàṣà ìtú wọn síta.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀sùn ràkì. ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ́rọ̀ ò ní fi wọ́n níran.
tẹnitẹni ọmọ Maiyegun ọ̀rẹ́ ara ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni mo fọlọ́hún sọ ẹ̀ bá kìlẹ́bù. lóòótọ́ olódodo ìlú ọ̀tá ìlú mọ̀mọ́ ni ìwọ ṣá máa ń ṣọ́ra kò sì mọ́ bẹ̀rù. bọ́tà ń lè rí bóníṣègùn lé káwọn mọ̀mọ́ fi ṣera wọn ni ó ti dẹrùn tí wọn ò gbọ́dọ̀ sì mọ́ bẹ̀. èèpo ọ̀bọ lọmọ bá dérò tàjẹ́ ò gbọ́dọ̀ jẹ́ ó ti dọba lórí àbínú ẹni kò sì mọ́ bùyà. àìsíwọ́lu ní ẹnìkẹ́ ìgbódì ẹyin lábàrá o ó kó ẹni tó bá dán o àkàmù. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì o. Ẹni bá ti ṣe èyí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dèrò òní fi wọ́n níran o.
Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì. Maiyegun ti dé gbogbo ọ̀jẹ̀lú ẹ̀ túnra kì. Ṣùgbọ́n ní bá ti ṣe yìí tó yẹ kí wọ́n ṣe ọmọ bá dẹ̀rọ̀ òní fi wọ́n níran.